Hey there, welcome to saas.unbound podcast. I'm your host, Anna Dana, head of growth at Saas Group, serial acquirer buying wonderful SaaS businesses to take them to the next level. And here I chat with inspiring founders and experts to get an inside scoop on how they made their business a success. And today with me is Tobias, founder of Tower, one of the brands that we've already acquired with Saas Group, and we're very happy with them. And now he's on a mission to help founders build better teams. And this is exactly the name of his project, buildingbetterteams.co. So make sure to check it out. And we're here to talk about psychological safety and building better relationships at work. So welcome, Toby. Good to see you here.
Wonderful. Thank you for making the time and having me. I'm excited.
Sure. Absolutely. Anytime. I mean, we've done a couple of these and they were really, really successful. Seriously, like one of the most listened to episodes of saas.unbound, which I'm really happy about. But yeah, psychological safety, honestly, not the term that I was very familiar with, but really fascinating. And I think, first of all, I would love to just get down to the definition, like what is psychological
hmm
safety?
Yeah, sure. It's in the public knowledge, I would say it's one of the new kids on the block, although it has been around for quite some time. Maybe a short detour into the history of that because it's so interesting. Google in I think 2012 already, they wanted to know what distinguishes their high performing teams from their not so high performing teams, right? They were looking for a solution or an answer to that question. Why are some teams performing better than others? And they found, surprise, surprise, number one is psychological safety. So it's not accumulating the most IQ points in a room, which of course is important. You have to have smart people, no doubt about that. But that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is having psychological safety. And I found that really interesting and encouraging actually as a founder because, hey, we want to have performance. We want to have successful teams, right? So I think that's a godsend to have that connection between performance and psychological safety. Um, in terms of a definition, psychological safety is made of a couple of components. So one big item, the biggest probably is trust in there. Another one is respect. Then there's also humility. So a lot of, well, soft factors, but combining them, making them work in a team is the solution to having higher performance. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned, this is kind of like a soft topic that a lot of leaders don't really know how to approach.
Mhm.
And well, because we're all about like KPIs and like give me the data and we want the data-driven decisions. So how to approach this kind of topic in a workplace, where to start?
Yeah. I think it always starts with leaders themselves. So if we want to build more trust in our teams, let's pick trust as an example. We can dive into other components if you want to too, but trust I think is a good example. If you understand how trust works, it's clear where you begin because trust has to be given first. It doesn't just come up out of thin air. It has to be given first. So that means we as leaders and founders have to start giving trust. That's where everything begins. So you can't just expect it to show up out of the blue. And we can dive into that topic and see how and how you could build trust and how all of that works. But I think that's a first thing to keep in mind. Trust is something that we need to give, that we need to start with, that leaders need to start with. And then after some time, it's reciprocated. It's coming back to you. It spreads in a team, but it doesn't spread. It doesn't exist. It doesn't emerge if we don't start. I think that's a first mindset shift. And also understanding, and let's see where this conversation takes us, but also understanding that trust is often a result in a psychologically safe environment or in your team building efforts, let's say it like that. So trust is often something that comes as a result from your relationship building efforts, right? Trust is something that is often if you do your homework in terms of relationship building, trust will be one of the things you get back.
All right. So like it starts with leaders, right?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously you have to work with it and kind of like start changing the status quo. So, what could be the right questions that leaders should ask their team, maybe if they want to change the status quo and like start working on creating a safer psychological environment for their people?
Hmm. Yeah, I think, well, an important part, I think, is to involve the team. That's one thing we can talk about that. And then also, if you ask me what questions could they ask, so I would say one question is, how do I want to be treated? Right? How would I love to be treated in a team, in a work environment? Because often, well, leaders have a good position. They're higher up in the ranks in the hierarchy, right? So we often don't see, or the way we are treated is of course different than other people in a team or in a bigger organization. But being aware of that and asking yourself, well, how would I want to be treated if I would have to walk in that person's shoes, in a non-leadership shoe? That's, I think, one of the big questions to ask. Um, yeah, I'll stop there, and let's see. We can dive into how we can create that, but I want to see where we're going.
Sure, absolutely. So there is obviously, you know, leaders try to strive for some balance, right? A
Mhm.
lot of leaders are afraid that, you know, if they give trust, how much trust is too
Oh
much
yeah.
trust, right? And how much of a good relationship is too good of a relationship, right? So is there any way you would like recommend, give some hands-on advice, maybe like how to balance between creating this safe environment but still push people for excellence and still like make sure that you have a high performing team where accountability and
Mhm.
independence are not just words?
You would not believe how often I get asked this question. This is incredible. So thanks for asking it because it's so interesting. I think in the minds of many founders and leaders, when they start building, let's the term I use for it in my trainings is people first leadership, people first cultures, right? So when leaders and founders start looking at ways to build people first cultures, there's often a felt dichotomy, right? And the dichotomy is, I can either be friendly and kind and build trust and psychological safety, or I can optimize for performance, results, profits, productivity. And this is deadly, actually, because there is no or between those two things. There is a big fat and between those two things, right? If you foster psychological safety and healthy relationships and a people first culture in general, then it will lead to better performance. So I understand the question. People often think, well, is there a balance? But I think that the best answer I can give is there is no conflict between these things. You can't overdo it. But, and this is important, I think, when I say founders are often thinking about, well, how far can I go or far should I go? I think the bad idea in their minds is that they cannot ask for performance too, right? Many think that if I start going down the people first route, we have to cuddle people to death. And that's not the way to go. You can also say, no, we have agreements that we made and that we want to keep. We want to have performance standards. We want to have productivity, all of that, right? It's not an either or. And actually, it only works in both directions, right? If you only ask for performance and for productivity, we know what happens. It's a burnout culture, probably. And if you only ask for butterflies and rainbows, you will get no productivity. That's okay too, and that's not the way it works. You really have to combine those things, and I think that's a huge unlock for many founders. When you start building a better culture, it doesn't mean you can't also ask for performance.
All right, thank you. So like
Mm.
let's start with relationships maybe, right?
Mhm.
So again, I think I feel like for a lot of leaders, like just the concept of building relationships
Mhm.
at work is kind of maybe
It
not a
freaks people
new
out.
one, yeah, but it freaks people out. Like, what?
Yeah.
I hired those people, they work for me. What kind of relationships are we talking about? So,
Yeah.
what kind of relationships are we talking about here?
Yeah, fantastic that you asked that. So first of all, we're not talking about best friends forever, right? That's not necessary. That's not the bar. The bar is much much lower. There has been a wonderful study. I can't remember by who. We can put it in the show notes. Um, and they found out that if people have, and now I quote them. I think I can quote them verbatim. Um, if people have a best friend at work, the performance is much much higher. And I wasn't really happy with that phrasing because I don't want to have just best friends at work. Not everybody. It's not necessary. It's not natural. It doesn't work like that. So I looked it up, and what they mean by best friend, it's a catchy phrase, right? What they mean by best friend is actually someone they can talk to about personal things. That's for me. That's not best friend. That's a human connection. I think. So the bar is not that high, but I think this is why I laughed when when you came up with a topic that it freaks people out, especially leaders. The notion that we should have relationships in air quote at work is for a lot of people a little bit well strange, and again, it doesn't have to be best friends at work, but we have to get in touch as humans. And I think that's an important thing to understand.
Sure. Okay. No, you're absolutely right. Like even today, I was telling my husband, like today we're going to talk with Toby about relationships at work, and he was
Yeah,
like, relationships at work, like what exactly do you
yeah,
mean, like especially because we're all remote as well, right? And
yeah,
yes, talking like this to somebody, maybe have an occasional like donut, right? The thing that
yeah,
you
yeah,
can run on Slack, which pairs you to a random
yeah,
person on the team to just have like a coffee chat.
hmm,
This is fine, but the idea of like having a relationship is kind of
yeah,
lost, especially in a remote team. So like how how can we talk about building relationships in a remote team if it's not exactly the coffee chat that we have on Slack, or it's not like an all hands that we have monthly? What is it like? What are the aspects of building relationships in remote teams?
yeah, yeah. Maybe I'll circle back to what you said earlier, and I think people forget that being in a relationship is not a choice we can have. As soon as we work with someone, as soon as we interact with someone, we are in relationships in relationship with that person already. So it's not a choice you have. The only choice you have is, do I want to have a good relationship, a positive one, a productive one, or the other end of the spectrum, right? I think that's really important to grasp. It's not a choice. You are in relationships if you want to, or if you don't want to. Now, your other question, how should we go about that? And you mentioned a couple of very popular options, having a donut over Slack or the all hands meetings. I think it comes down to the quality and effectiveness of the formats, let's say formats that we use. And we have a special format in building better teams that we love and that our members also love. And I think it's a good example and a good contrast to what's out there. When I say quality and effectiveness, what do I mean? You can put two people together at opposite sides of a table and call it relationship building, but it's difficult. It's not that easy because let's make an example. You put together a shy person and an extrovert together. That's going to be a pretty one-sided conversation. Probably there's only one side talking and the other side listening. You might have an intern and a C-level leader. That's also not a balanced conversation. So I think we have to get a little bit more clever and a little bit more intentional and deliberate when we talk about building relationships. I don't want to take away the coffee chat meetings. They're wonderful. They're for chit chat, and that is absolutely essential in a healthy culture. Don't kill that format, but it's not a really effective format to build a stronger, resilient relationship, and that's what I'm aiming for. So, just to give you an example, what I would replace it with or add is a more intentional format, thinking a little bit more about how you want such a conversation, such a meeting, such an encounter to go. And the way we do it is actually structuring that time very, very deliberately. So let's say you have 30 minutes with that person, a one-on-one with another person. The first, I think, interesting item is um, really mix people in an organization, right? Break out of your the little teams that are already there. An example: our Windows developer and our designer never had anything to do with each other. It just wasn't in their job descriptions, right? So we really had to, I don't want to say force, but encourage them and help them get in touch with each other, because you want as many strong and resilient relationships as possible in our organization, not just in sub teams and departments, but you want them to go in across all of the organization, actually. And so that's the first important thing, I guess, mixing people throughout the organization. And then also think about how people should spend the time they have together. And the way we do it is we have 30 minutes. We give 10 minutes to one person, and the other person just listens. No questions, no interruptions. These are your 10 minutes. And I'm just paying attention and being there. And then we switch roles. It's my 10 minutes, and you're going to listen and not interrupt and not ask any questions. And then the third 10 minutes are a normal conversation. And you can already hear a normal conversation. So the first 20 minutes are really different. They're an exercise in listening. They create balance between those two people because, as said, put together a C-level leader and an intern or a regular member of a team, and you won't get a natural conversation or a balanced conversation. So we really have to think about how we get the most out of those encounters, especially in a remote team where every minute that we spend together, in air quotes, probably not seeing each other physically, is really, really expensive and valuable.
That's true. No, I absolutely love those, little meetings.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, sometimes I think you're right. If you lack intention, especially like if it's short notice and you're like, you have to make this decision to communicate with the person right here, right now, it's a little bit difficult to like to be present and just like realize that I have to make some effort to make it happen and to make it work. But also, one of the struggles I think a lot of companies have, um, especially fast growing companies, is how to keep everyone in the loop. So, like for example, at saas group, we're hiring a lot, right? We're growing like crazy. And I mean, seriously, there are new companies that we acquire. There are more team members in the central team. So we, of course, try to make sure everyone gets acquainted and everyone reaches out to the new members of the team and makes
Mm-hmm.
sure, we're there for them. But, this speeds up, and obviously you have your job and you have your tasks. How to make sure it works in rapidly growing organizations when you add like 10 people per month?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How to make sure it doesn't interrupt anything you're doing?
Yeah, yeah, that's a brilliant question. I think it comes down to, again, being deliberate about this. Let's take a different perspective on it. So you don't find a company out there that isn't deliberate and strategic and, I don't know, investing in their marketing or in their sales or in their funding process or in engineering, whatever it is. But you'll be hard pressed to find a company that is the same, that has the same amount of deliberation and effort and strategic approach when it comes to culture and team building. And this is actually what I'm suggesting, that we need to come up with the right structures and processes and habits and routines and formats so we can be sure that nothing falls down in this area either, right? You would be very careful to build a strong process in marketing and sales. Why not do that in culture and in team building too? So the it your question, how exactly you can do that is it goes from the first minute of that employee arriving, or before that, actually, of course, in hiring and in the pre-welcome, if you want to, then in onboarding, and then but that's, I think that's pretty well known for most founders. But then once people are there and hopefully staying months, years, maybe a decade, I don't know, hopefully, um, being aware that this needs a process, that needs a strategy, that needs a deliberation. And one of the things that can be part of such a strategy is what I just named, that we call it the peer inquiry, the peer inquiry, where we mix two people twice a month and keep conversations flowing and relationships growing all across the organization. And there's lots of other things you can do, but I think you really have to approach it deliberately. And maybe also another thing that or perspective that I like is looking at the your meeting and format landscape that you have. So you have all hands, you have weeklies, you have daily stand-ups, maybe whatever you have. There's a whole bunch, a whole bunch of things. Looking at that from a perspective of needs, because a team, an organization, to run smoothly has different needs. You need to keep each other updated. You need to build relationships. You need to plan. You need to share a vision, and on and on and on. So there's a set of 10, 12, 15, give feedback, and all of that needs that a team has to run smoothly. And if you look at that from that perspective, you will definitely find areas in your own team, in your own organizations, where your team is missing out on requirements and needs. And sometimes you have three formats that try to do the same thing. So maybe you can take one out and make calendars a little bit lighter. And there are two or three things that don't work. So how can you foster those qualities and make sure those needs are fulfilled? I think that's an interesting perspective to take, looking at the communication needs that a team has, and then looking where you have gaps in your strategy.
You're right. Well, you mentioned that, it has to start even before the person arrives, right?
Mm.
And this is really fascinating because, well, we're also working a lot on our HR brand, right? And how to tell people that we're pretty cool. I mean, honestly, no joke, not joking. And I mean, shameless kind of plug in here for everyone. But honestly, whenever I meet with anybody face to face and ask, hey, like, how does it work for you? Like, how does saas.group feel? And like, no joke, the most common answer is, it actually felt a little bit weird how cool you guys are, and like how chill it is, and like
Yeah.
how kind everyone is. And then like, okay, that's like so great to hear, right? But obviously it is no small feat to just get it out there, right? Obviously I have this little stage to tell people how cool we are, right? But how could a brand or a leader, if we were talking about smaller team, actually make it their message, right? How
Mm.
can it be, how the culture can be addressed in job boards, in brand positioning? Because, well, we all have read about, we're all family, and there are like pizza parties on on Friday, and it's all in memes now, right? Because so many people, so many brands have promised a good
Yeah.
culture and didn't deliver. So have you noticed, or maybe you have a piece of advice for founders that want to advertise culture, to make, culture is one of their um, values that they want to put out there for people to go for,
Yeah.
right? It's not just salary and a good product we're working
Yeah.
on, but yeah, how would you recommend doing this?
Yeah. I think getting concrete and being authentic. What I mean is, and I totally empathize to what you just said. When I look at about us pages of teams and organizations, So much copy paste out there, right? Everybody wants promises to have a trusting environment and psychological safety. Or they're calling it different, but everybody claims to have such a culture, right? There's so much copy and paste out there, and I said making it concrete and being authentic. And what I mean is, if you say you have a trusting environment, how? How does it? How can people understand that it really is, in reality, a trusting environment? One thing that we did, and just one small example, we also said we had a trust. Trust was one of our big values, right? We did that too, and we meant it. But we went a couple of steps further and proved that it actually is true by saying how trust is implemented in our culture. For example, we had a no limit vacation policy. That was one thing. And you have to be concrete and authentic how you implement those values. If you just state the values, and 99% of organizations just do that, we value trust and respect and community. But how, what are you doing to implement that in reality? And if you bring those examples onto an About Us or a hiring page, people will quickly understand if it's real or if it's fake, I think. So I think that this would be 80% of the game. And then maybe the other 20%. Today, podcasts are a big opportunity for founders, leaders in a company to get visible or audible in that case. And you quickly hear in a 1 hour conversation if that person has the right value set, mindset, or if they don't, right? So if on their company page they're all about trust and community and connection, and what they're saying and how they are acting in an interview is totally different, you don't have to think long and hard which one is true, right? So listen to a couple of podcast episodes with those people, or videos on YouTube or something like that. Anything where it's pretty hard to fake, right? In a short value statement on your website, well, you can write whatever you want, but in a half-hour conversation, an hour-long conversation, it's people are smart. We have, as humans, we have antenna for things like that, and we notice.
That's a great advice. Honestly, I love it. First of all, 100% agree. I mean, we're super intuitive. This is what I do before every podcast. I go to other podcasts and listen to them and see how people interact.
Mhm.
You know, and one other thing that I do, and I mean, I remember when it was my onboarding, right, for this role at saas group, and everything was kind of new. M&A was a new space, and our M&A team was telling me like how you can learn that a company's great or they're doing great. And I'm like, well, there is no data. You go to Crunchbase and there is nothing. And like, how do I find it? And they said something that really like stuck with me to this day. They were like, people talk. You will always find out what's going on in the company. And seriously, I just creep around anything out there because, we have a magical thing of an internet on our
Yeah,
fingertips, right?
yeah, yeah.
So, um, I go and see like what they're posting, what people post about them, what there is in the reviews. I mean, there is Glassdoor, right? So, yeah, I once had to decline a podcast because I
Oh,
yeah, I
it
it
smelled
was it
funny.
was it smelled funny. Yeah, like
Oh,
everything looked very, very shiny, but it was a huge employee churn and all the
mm,
reviews were really, really bad. And I was like,
yeah.
no. I mean, great product, but maybe not the right culture for us to advertise.
Very good. Thanks for being courageous and then pulling the plug on something like that, because I think that's the only way we can contribute to building better cultures in the bigger landscape, right? If we have to get in one way or another vocal about bad cultures, right? And I think it's different compared to 20 years ago or 30 years ago, where a boiling, hot-tempered boss was, well, that's just how he is. No, it's not going to work out today anymore. So I think employees and people are much more careful with that and much more mindful about that. But it's so great to see people like you who have a platform, right, react on the state of cultures, and I love that. Yeah.
Thanks. And I mean, it's we always talk about culture and cultural alignment for the acquisition. I mean, what you were telling me about Tower, I'm like, okay, we're doing this and we're doing that, and I kind of feel like you were a bit, you had something to do with it, but it's a great culture, and this is what we're growing, and we actually value that. One of the things that I really, first it raised my eyebrows, like I was like, what, never saw this before, but then I was like, this is so cool. So when my first interaction with saas group, I went to the website and it said we have a culture of no assholes. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh,
Hmm.
that's so cool. And it's true, and I mean, you're absolutely right. Like, why, you're in a long-term relationship,
Hmm.
so why would you,
Yeah.
want to go that way? But okay, so what is the best way to build a stronger relationship with your leaders, with your peers? Make sure that you rely on your KPIs, but there is also a huge amount of trust. And even if you have unlimited vacations, which we do as well at saas group, um, you don't just go to Maldives for 4 months without telling people what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, good example. I think maybe one of the topics that always shows up again and again in our leadership trainings is the topic of agreements. And it sounds so basic, but an agreement is something that you or I say that you or I do or do not do. And it's something we have to talk about what it is. We have to talk about who takes care of it and by when it's done. And the fourth item is really important. It has to be written down. I mean, in a project management software or a to-do software or anywhere in a document, it has to be written down. And you wouldn't believe, or maybe you do believe, but so many people, so many cultures, I want to say collapse. That's too crass, but um, are in pain, are in serious suffering because people don't keep their agreements. And it's such a little thing. It's so basic that we don't get it taught anywhere, not in school, not in university, and certainly not on the job. And agreements, you asked how you can build stronger relationships, right? I have your question still in mind, but keeping your agreements is hugely important for creating better relationships. And you also asked in your question, how can we be a high performant culture, right? High performing culture. So I think agreements, a culture of strong and kept agreements, is really worth a second and a third look. And it's such a small topic, and it sounds so banal. It sounds so simple. But if you take a look at the day to day, you will notice that so many agreements are not kept. They're past their due date, and nobody says anything. And that's a real problem because when we're going back to psychological safety, we're tying it all together here. When we go back to psychological safety and we look at how trust emerges and how trust is being fostered, one way to foster trust is to be to keep your agreements, right? If I tell you, Anna, I'm going to do something until the end of the week, you have it on your desk by noon, it's going to be green and big, and I don't do that, and I don't do that repeatedly, your trust in me will suffer. There's no other way, right? And so this is a simple but a very, very foundational aspect of building trust, building psychological safety, and then also building a high performing culture. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But to less um, fluffy thing, you know, disappointments happen, right? There are people that do not really understand the boundaries of trust or the boundaries of relationships at work. So leaders can be disappointed, or peers can be disappointed. And the question is not really how to avoid disappointment, right? I honestly think it's unavoidable.
Hmm.
Mistakes happen, we're all
Yeah.
people. But how to deal with it, and how to deal with it proactively and also healthily, that you keep the relationship going and kind of, not look past it, but, go with it and continue with your trust.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fantastic. Because often people, when they are being disappointed, and as you said, there's no way around that. We can't all keep our agreements all of the time. It's absolutely true. But the other one type of reaction where, okay, I have to dial down my trust, and the opposite of trust is micromanagement, right? That's at the other end of the spectrum, and we don't want to go there. Really, it's bad for managers. It overwhelms them. It puts multiple additional tasks on their plate, and it's demotivating as hell for employees. So we don't want to go there. That's for sure. So how can we deal with disappointment or with the occasional mistakes? I think you have to debug every situation individually, because the reasons probably are different for each situation, or for many. Um, One is, I talked about trust a lot in this conversation. Just and only giving trust is not enough, right? You can't just say, I'll trust you to do that. Come back to me in 7 days and deliver a fantastic result, right? For many people, that's not enough. Many people, especially in junior roles, need more support, more guidance, right? So trust is not the only thing. You have to see how self-reliant that person in that position, in that task already is. So it might even be a senior person who has a new role, a new task, a new project, and suddenly they need a little bit more guidance, support, and more conversations, maybe. That's the other part. Staying in touch with each other, having conversations. So if you have somebody that has disappointed you a couple of times, you probably want to have more check-ins, more conversations with that person. On the other end of the spectrum, if somebody is an old hand in their job, in their position, and delivers fantastic results all the time, you don't have to check in with that person so often. So I think dialing in the amount or the level of guidance and support, I think, is really critical. And then also having a candid conversation about the value of agreements and how you want to play that game here in that company. Because again, and I'm repeating myself, but it's so core, and I see it again and again. We're not used to agreements meaning much, right? It's not a core in our culture, actually. Okay, we said Thursday, okay, but well, a different project came on my table, so what should I do? And the answer is, well, you should have talked to me. It's The point is not that we keep each and every agreement. It's not possible. Life happens, and other priorities crop up, and maybe sometimes I even do forget something. But it's how we handle those situations. So you have two options. If you see that you will not be able to keep an agreement that's in the future, next Thursday, I will get in touch with you proactively and tell you, Anna, I'm sorry. I know I promised for next Thursday this and that, but I'm sorry, I won't be able to keep that. Other priorities have come up, other projects. I don't know. Should we reschedule the due date, or can I deliver a little bit less of the amount? That's the option. And if it's past next Thursday, if I see that, oh, fuck, I should have delivered something last Thursday, then it's on me to say, oh, Anna, I'm really sorry. I know we had an agreement. I'm sorry. That's not the way we want to work here. Let's talk about what went wrong and how we can do that better next time. But that's the two options you have to keep that trust, and to, over time, build a culture around agreements. And you will see many of the problems we have, the smaller ones, that just disappear. And that's wonderful. I love that.
Absolutely. That's such a great advice because, well, I just see, I'll share a bit of my experience because
Yeah.
I schedule lots of, podcasts, lots of different events and appearances.
Mhm.
And I just, I honestly love when people come back to me and say, oh, I'm sorry, something came up, or I won't be there, personal reasons. No explanation needed. It's none of my
Mhm.
business. Something happened with you, right? But thank you so much for telling me. But I also see a different approach. If people start telling you, some get a little bit like passive aggressive. They won't even like say hello, like something came up, and you're like, oh, okay, well, still thank you, but like chill. I won't scold you. I'm not your teacher, right? And
Mhm.
yeah, some people go into avoidance and they're like, okay, I just won't reply. Let's see if it passes.
Yeah.
That is, yeah, that is not a very comfortable situation. And again, not because like I'm so mad or so pissed at you that you
Mhm.
didn't show up or, didn't keep the agreement, but I'm mostly pissed that you didn't let me know that you won't be able to do this.
Exactly.
And that's it. So, yeah, and it's never just about a person, right? Everyone has their own reasons.
Mhm.
So, yeah, thanks so much for reminding that. And
Mhm.
I mean, please, whoever's listening, please tell people that you're not coming. It's just, it's so good. It's so
Yeah.
good. But yeah, I have to ask you, like, if you have this one hack that maybe lets you break the ice, in the new environment, if you're, a new person in the company, or maybe lets you, build that trust a little bit faster, lets you become the member of the team. Yeah, if there is anything, please share.
Mhm. Two things come to mind, and I know I sound like a broken record, but you just, I hope I can quote you almost verbatim. How can you become a person that's, you didn't say trusted, but a person that's welcome in the team? I think, yeah, start or start by keeping your agreements. That's really core, because especially in the beginning, that's this trust forming phase, right? And if you don't keep your agreements, well, I'm sorry, you won't be popular at my company, definitely not. And from the company side or from the organizational side, I think um, everybody knows this is a critical phase in an employee's life when they just joined. So be very, very intentional and deliberate about that phase. How? For example, by checking in more often than you would normally do, and also by checking in from all levels, right? So probably that person is integrated into some department somewhere in a sub team, but especially in the beginning, well, as a C-level leader or even the founder or CEO, make the gift of having a short conversation with that person. This is so, it shows so much appreciation if the CEO in a little bit of a bigger company or a C-level leader that you normally don't have many touch points with takes time. It doesn't have to be much, but has an honest conversation with you. And it doesn't have to be about work. Actually, it shouldn't be, especially early in their career. Just a 10-minute chat or a 30-minute chat or a 15-minute chat. Who are you as a person? What are your hobbies? Who are we as humans? And this is such a wonderful moment to build trust, to build human connections, to build better relationships. People often overcomplicate things and look for complicated answers. I think the best answer is to be intentional about all those processes, to take them seriously, to not trust that they happen anyways, because they don't, definitely not. You really have to come up with a strategy, a process. I know I'm sounding like I'm, I'm a process oriented person, but I think we need that in culture, really, because if we don't look at it from that perspective, it's by chance, right? Everything happens haphazardly. And I don't want my culture to be a haphazard culture. I want it to be exactly like I want it to be: positive, strong, healthy, and resilient. And I think you can only do that if you pay attention and approach it deliberately.
Awesome. Thank you. I think those are great. I mean, even though, it kind of all led to it and we repeated ourselves a little bit over the course of this conversation, but I mean, people love to be reminded of simple things. Sometimes it's just like, oh, wait, I knew that. That's common
Yeah.
sense. But it just gets lost because you're just so close
Mhm.
and short sighted in your own situation that you just forget.
Yeah, and I think the problem, of course, also is that other things seem higher priority, and I get that, right? I wouldn't put, honestly. So culture and team building and people first leadership are a big part of my life, but I've been a founder for 20 years, an entrepreneur for 20 years, so I'm also realistic, and I would never put culture and team building as priority number one. That's just not realistic. It can't be. But I think what's important, if you go lower, further down in that priority hierarchy, it's probably number 5, 6, or 7, and that's okay. The only thing that is important is that it still happens. Because in many organizations, priorities 5, 6, and 7 just don't happen anymore. And I get it, because there's so much to do, and so many important, urgent things to do. But I think little by little is a good mantra. We have to put a little bit of time into those topics, because many organizations just put it off indefinitely into the future. Well, in 6 months we'll do something, or in 12 months. Guess what? In 12 months, nothing will be different. The stress will be the same. The urgency of other topics will also be the same. So I really think the mastery in this topic comes from acknowledging that it's not priority number one, but it still has to fit in into your day-to-day organizational life, and that's tricky. That's tricky.
For sure. Well, thank you so much, Toby. I really hope after, this episode, whoever listened to it feels like, you know, it should be a priority, or it should be out there at least. It should be given a bit more thought. So thanks so much for bringing it up. I mean, I enjoyed our conversation as always. You're always welcome in the pod. So thanks so much for your time, and I hope we can do it again sometime.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me, Anna. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Sure. And take care.